Most of you probably don't think about growing grain in your garden, and I'm not talking about growing grain for harvest. This is grain that will be used in walkways and as cover crops, and I've used it successfully for over 20 years. There's several different benefits. One is I've got a mud-free walkway, and also I'm adding organic matter, so I can mow this periodically during the year or let it grow. It's not going to get very tall if I don't mow it, but I often mow it and use the clippings as mulch. I've got the root system that's also adding organic matter to the soil. It will suppress weeds. Now, it's not going to eliminate every weed, but you'll have less weeds certainly than if it was bare ground, and certainly less weeds than if I brought in some straw or something as a walkway covering and it happened to have weed seeds in it. Then I would actually be planting weeds, which I have done before. So it's a nice system. It's worked well for me. Now, to understand how this works, you need to understand a little bit about grain. In wheat and barley and some of the other small grains, there are different categories, such as spring grains, fall grains, and then there's a category that's called facultative that I'll talk about. The spring grain you plant in the spring, it comes up, produces a seed head that same year, and you harvest it sometime later in the summer. A fall or a winter grain is planted in the fall, like September through October in this country. It grows, it germinates and grows in the fall. The little plant then overwinters and it produces a seed head the following year. And in a true winter grain, those plants actually need a certain amount of cold to tell them to produce a seed head. And so if they're planted in the spring, they don't produce very many seed heads, if any at all. Now, a facultative grain is one that can behave either way. So if you plant it in the spring, it will behave like a spring grain. If you plant it in the fall, it will overwinter and produce the following year like a fall grain. So in my garden, what I've done for the past 20-25 years is planted fall grains in the spring in walkways between my gardening beds. Now, since those plants don't get the cold they need, they produce few, if any, seed heads, and what I end up with is basically an annual turf that I can walk on, so I won't be muddy after the garden's been irrigated or after a rain event. It also produces some organic matter that can go back into the garden, helps suppress weeds. And so today we're going to show you how we go about planting fall grain in the spring. And so we'll demonstrate that right now. It doesn't take much equipment to plant grain in your garden, especially in a walkway. So what I use is just a drop spreader like you might use to apply fertilizer or lawn seed to a lawn. So once you throw the lever, the material falls straight out of the bottom, and it has agitators that run off the wheels. And so I filled it, in this case, this is a winter or fall wheat that I'm going to plant, and this is in March. So what we expect is that this is going to grow a lot of foliage and not many seed head. I want to plant this pretty thick. What I'm going to do is go over the walkway down and back maybe 3 or 4 times, so I get quite a bit of seed. And then I will use a rototiller set to till only 1 or 2 inches deep, and just go lightly over it one pass, and that's it. And then in this country we'll have to water to make sure that that gets enough moisture to come up. But it comes up thickly and grows, and I will have something that looks just like regular turf, only it's consisting of grain. Again, this has worked extremely well for me through the years. I just need to make sure that I'm planting a true winter variety of either wheat or barley. I've used a lot of winter barley, and not have the seed store sell me a facultative or spring variety, because if I plant either one of them in the spring, I'll have seed heads to deal with. That's not the end of the world. I can run a lawnmower over it and take those off, but it's just another annoyance. And I would also say, if you're going to do this, it's probably good to plan ahead and get the seed the previous fall, because some seed dealers don't carry much winter or fall grain seed in the spring, and if you do go in asking for it, they will say, oh, you don't want that, because if you plant it, it won't head out. And then you'll say, exactly. In this country, this would not grow without irrigation. I sprinkle irrigate, which makes this possible. This system may not be feasible if you're using drip or furrow irrigation, unless you maybe by hand watered some of this separately, or figured out a way to get some water onto this. I don't water for the grain, I water for the vegetables. The grain takes care of itself, and it doesn't need as much water typically as the vegetables, but it will need some irrigation if you're in a very dry location.